Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly. My co-host for today's show is Janet Coursey, and our guest for the show is Joyce Kaye Gatschenberger. And Joyce is the author of Lines of Listening, and your other book is Generations Interactive. What is the next book, Joyce?
Generations Intertwine.
Oh, Intertwine. Okay, I didn't look too closely at that one. And Joyce, please tell us about yourself and your books.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. I really appreciate being on, and you are a gracious host. Thank you very much. As you said, I have two books. My first book is entitled Lines of Listening, and it's an expose of generational child abuse and marital betrayal, and it is nonfiction. The second book is Generations Intertwine, and it is a fiction, but it is a continuation of the first book. And I'm currently working on the next book. Hopefully it will be done by Christmas of this year.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have 3 out by the end of this year, hopefully.
Yes.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about Lines of Listening.
Okay. My name is Joyce Kaye Gatschenberger. My married name is Joyce Kaye Walters. And the reason I do that is because Joyce Kaye Gatschenberger gave me the attitude that set me on my path in life. So I publish under that name. And Lines of Listening, as I said, is nonfiction, and my family is always my inspiration. And an expose means kind of a viewpoint, pictures in time, something that you get an idea about. So it is a collection of ideas or pictures that have influenced me as a person and as an adult as I move through my lifespan.
Well, tell us a little bit about you, the person, because I think you've been in the medical field for a number of years, and you've dealt with issues like abuse. So why don't you tell us a little about that?
Okay.
And how this led up to Lines of Listening.
Okay. I've been an RN for 35 years. I have an associate and bachelor's degree in nursing from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I also have a master's degree in community development from UC Davis in California. Mm. It took me 10 years to get through college.
Wow.
I also am a military wife. My husband was in the Air Force for 22 years. So we moved around a lot. Yeah. I also am the mother of 3 children. They are now older. They are adults. And my husband passed away a few years ago. He was exposed to Agent Orange. Oh. He died of a soft tissue sarcoma.
Wow.
Which means he was exposed to Agent Orange, which caused the cancer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the ideas in the book where it talks about marital betrayal is the story of my relationship with him. After he died, I found out by going through his briefcase that he had as they call it, another woman. Uh-huh. He had a secret bank account, and he had a secret family, which we did not know about, and we probably would never have found out until I found a piece of paper, and we can talk about more of that as we go on. The generational child abuse is also something I talk about in the book. That is a whole nother story, and it has to do with intimate interactions in my own family. And just an overview of the book itself, Lines of Listening is a collection of the interactions, and the reason I named the story that is the interactions that I had with my parents and the people around me when I was a child. Lines of Listening came about because I was very aware of what people were telling me when I was a child, not only by their words, but by their actions and their facial expressions. And I took those lines of listening and I made it into a conversation, and I really got to know what they were saying to me, not because I trusted what they were saying, but because I trusted the conversation that they were having with me. And oftentimes what they were saying is not what they really meant.
Uh-huh.
So the lines of listening developed into a conversation that I got the true meaning of, and that gave me the true meaning of what they were trying to say to me. And that is, again, a whole nother story.
It's very psychological.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm curious then, how did finding out that your husband, when he passed away, had another family, how did that play into this lines of listening as far as, does it play into the book?
They are intertwined, one without the other. And I have to back up a little bit because I have to tell you kind of the beginning before I tell you the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
The story starts with my ancestors who came from Germany, coming over in the very early 1900s from Germany to the United States. They were very hardworking, very intense, very industrious people. They were stoic, they were intense, and did not talk a lot. They do their expression by actions.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they brought that idea over with them. When they came to the United States, they settled in Illinois. They worked in agriculture and in mining because that's what they did in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Their idea was you don't express your feelings, you keep your head to the grindstone, and you work.
Right.
Because that's what you do.
And I know someone who's from Germany, or knew someone who's from Germany, and she was very much like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when they brought that attitude over, they found jobs, they integrated, they learned English, and they became fairly successful in that they could support their family and find a home and learn English and move on in the American society. I'm not sure what happened or how they got twisted, but that same attitude and that same idea about working hard and not expressing ideas turns into abuse.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so as my family, my ancestors, became integrated into the American society, and of course nothing is written down. I got this all by story of my aunts, my uncles, and my cousins. My grandfather and my great-grandfather were very abusive people. They were very stern, they were very intense, and they were very physical.
So was it physical, verbal, or what kind of abuse was it?
All of those.
All of those.
All
Okay.
of those. To give you just an example, my father was the youngest of 13 children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now that is in today's society probably a very unusual situation, but as they say back in the day, you had to have a lot of children so you could work the farm.
Right. Maintain the farm. Right.
Maintain the family, pass the family name along to the next generation, because maybe out of the 13 children, 5 would die of cholera, disease, infection, accident, or whatever. So
Right.
maybe 6 or 8 children would survive out of the 13. So you had to have a lot of children.
Yeah.
So my father was the youngest of 13. I can only imagine from a woman point of view what a woman would go through having 13 children.
Yeah.
I can't even visualize.
Yeah.
That would be
Sorry.
modern society today would be an intense challenge anyway, but that was before modern hospitals, antibiotics, things like that. And to give you an example of, just one example of the abuse, my father, who was very young at the time, worked with his father, who worked with his father, and they maintained a truck farm. In case you're not familiar with that, it was like where you grow produce and you sell it in a market.
Right.
You take it to farm, or take it to market, as they say, from your farm.
Mm-hmm.
So you had potatoes and tomatoes and peas and corn and maybe some peaches and apples. And so you had an orchard and you had a greenhouse. My father, at a very young age, was tethered in the greenhouse at night to make sure that the produce wasn't stolen.
Yeah, and you said several of the kids probably were, not just your father.
Yes, yes. So that gives you an idea that they thought the produce was more important than the child.
Children. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one example. The other example is my mother said that when she met her father-in-law for the very first time, and I talk about this in the book in more detail, that they went to his house, and my father and she knocked on the front door, and they kept calling his name, saying, "Where are you? Where are you?" His name was Otto, of course. Yeah. He's from Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very German.
Yes. And no response, no response. They knew he was home. They walk around the house. They knock on the windows. They knock every place they could think of, walk to the back door. No answer. Finally, my father breaks open the front door, calls through the house. Again, no answer. So he ends up at the back bedroom. My grandfather is in bed with a very young girl who is not his wife. Yeah. He ceremoniously does not get up out of the bed. He is nude. She is nude. And he introduces his girlfriend to my mother, his daughter-in-law, and my son, and says, would you like to have some tea, or what are you doing? Or
like it was just commonplace. Yeah.
And he saw nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In addition to that, my grandfather, this takes place in Illinois, was both a sheriff and a bootlegger at the same time.
That was typical back then. Yeah.
So that just
definitely sounds like a movie.
Yes, that just gives you an example of the tenacity, the intensity that occurred in my family with just a couple of the stories that were handed down, as I say, by word of mouth about my family, and they thought that was probably normal, that if that's the way everyday life worked, well, maybe that's the way all families worked. And so, I don't know, I can't speak for them, but they never seemed to question it. And as I got older and I watched them, because I became, when you're in an abusive household, which I'll tell you more about that, you learn to be very observant. You learn to be quiet, and you learn to watch, and you learn to withhold your opinions, you withhold your thoughts, and you become very astute at reading people.
And that's what I was going to ask you. What was it like for you? Because oftentimes they say this is passed on.
It definitely is.
Oh, it definitely is. Okay.
Yes.
So that's what I was going to ask you. How? But the cycle can be broken,
yes,
though.
It can.
I mean, I'm sure you had children.
Yes.
And I'm certain that from what I know of you, you would never have done what may have been passed on to you, to your children. There are times when
correct.
The cycle
You're
can
correct.
be broken.
I did not pass it on. You're correct. A couple things happened. Like I say, I was very curious, and I would ask my aunts, who are all, of course, older than my father. I would ask them, what happened when you were growing up?
Right.
Why did all of this occur and you never talk about it? Why is everyone so secret? Because that's one of the hallmarks of abuse. Everyone is very secret. Yeah. You don't share things. You keep it quiet. You don't let anyone know what's going on outside the home.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And they would say, well, it was just the way we lived, or we don't talk about those things, or we never had that happen, or they would deny that anything ever was wrong with anyone.
Right.
We don't know why these things happen. Somebody's telling you stories. And I knew by listening through the lines of communication that I had already developed as a younger child, that wasn't true. So I learned early not to trust what they were saying.
Oh.
Because I knew something was wrong. Kids are very smart.
Yeah.
They pick up things very early. And so I knew what they were telling me and what I was picking up on my own were not the same. So I started asking more questions, and I started asking other people that were farther removed in my family, what went on? How come this happened? Do you know anything about Grandpa? Do you know anything about Grandma? And little by little, I started putting pieces together and found out the story that I had just related to you, some of the little pieces. And I relate more of it in my actual book, Lines of Listening, because it was so relevant to me. And because as I read more and had more life experiences, I realized that I was not alone. And I realized I grew up in a dysfunctional family because my father, who had been raised in this environment, acted the same way when he had his own family. And that's why he acted that way, is because he was raised that way.
Right. To him, that was the norm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if he was raised that way and it was normal for him, then that made sense. If he was raised in a different way, that would be different for him. So if he was raised with abuse and he was abusive, if he was raised in a good, loving family, wouldn't it be great if he would be loving and helpful?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought there's got to be a difference here. So that's when I started looking at what is the difference between abuse and love? What is the difference between bullying and support?
But do you think that there is a correlation between the two? Because sometimes if you're abused and you think that's the norm, in their mind, that is a form of love, in a sense. Do you follow me on that?
I do follow you, and I think the difference comes in that a philosophy that I developed, and I've done a lot of work with parents and children in healthcare, and I think the difference is I've never met a parent who didn't love their child. However, their ability to express that love is what's compromised.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
So they bring with them their experience, their attitude, and their ability. And that's what gets compromised.
Mm.
But they still love their child.
Yeah, I completely can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the difference, though, between lines of listening and generations intertwine?
Well, let me go back just a minute and give you another perspective on lines of listening, because it has to do with a personal story to kind of give you a full picture of it. As I was writing my book, I thought, this is a pretty intense subject because it talks about abuse in my family.
Yeah.
And I knew I wasn't alone, and I knew that my siblings were involved in it, because not only did my grandparents and parents go through abuse, but they in turn raised us in an abusive family, much like they had been raised. So I talked to my siblings and I said, I'm going to write this book because, first of all, I need to write it for myself, but I need to let others know that this is okay. You can talk about it. You can help other people. You can lessen the burden for people in general.
Right.
So I showed them what I was going to write, and I told them what was specific about each one of them, because I have sisters and brothers. So I said, I'm writing this. It's in a draft form. And I read it for them, and I said, I'm going to publish a book, and this is going to be in it. And I read it for them so they could physically hear my words say about the story. And of course, they all said, oh, yes, sure, yeah, you're going to write a book. Oh, well, big deal. And they agreed that everything was correct that I had written and read. And of course, they didn't believe I would ever write a book. But, oh, yes, placate me. And yes, so sure,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So nobody objected. Nobody said anything about it. And of course, again, this is a very intense subject.
Yeah.
So I published the book. And it is, again, nonfiction. And I keep reiterating that because it's important.
So there was fallout.
Oh, there was major fallout.
Yeah.
There was major fallout because I had mentioned things that were true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They were personal and they were intense. So I get phone calls and I get innuendos and I get threats. So make a long story short, my family has now disowned me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because you broke the code.
Absolutely.
You broke the code.
They said, how could you ever do that? How could you ever do that? I said, is there anything in the book that I wrote that is not true? They were quiet.
Yeah,
said,
it's hard for people to face when there's abuse in the family. Yeah.
It's very intense and very impossible, but very important.
Yes.
So lines of listening has gotten me in more trouble than probably anything I've ever done.
But Joyce, you were on another show.
Yes.
We're starting a new show, and you were on a different show as well.
Yes.
And we talked a little bit about this. I actually helped someone write their story, and we both know that even the way people see things are different. She had 2 daughters, and I'm not going to mention that book or that name on for this show, but she had 2 daughters who were raised in a household where 4 boys died because of rare diseases. But those girls don't remember it the same way, the story, the same way their mother told their story.
Right.
Because we all perceive things differently. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen or it didn't happen that way. It's just that we see things differently as we're growing up, even though we're in the same household. So no 2 stories are going to be told the same. And like I said, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen or happen the way you saw it, but their way of seeing it was different.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And that's a good viewpoint to put on it. And that's why in the foreword of my book, I say, this is my perspective written in my words from my viewpoint, so that if anyone has a attitude or viewpoint that's different, then that's great and wonderful. But we grew up in the same household with the same parents at the same time with the same environment. And you're right, it could be a different viewpoint.
It's no different,
and it's hard for me to see simply because I asked them if anything that I wrote in there was not correct. They agreed that it was correct.
This is before you published the book.
It's after. It's during the reading of it to them, and after the publishing of it, they all agreed it was correct.
Okay,
but they still have disowned me.
Well, I think it's one thing when you talk about growing up. I have brothers, and we all always get together and we always talk about what it was like growing up. And even, I just got back from a trip back home, and even today in talking to them, at one point we didn't agree on things. And now that we're getting older and we look back, they'll go, you were right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's all families, even though they may not see it that way, maybe there's a reason they don't want to open their mind to things or see things a certain way. And maybe it's because they feel embarrassed or whatever. But as you get older, I find that it's more often people will reflect back and think, oh, maybe you were right. You are correct. Doesn't always mean they agree 100%, but they do see that maybe there was elements of this or that or whatever. And certainly writing something that's as revealing as this, it's probably more dealing with the fact that, do I want to face this humility?
Right.
Than it is the fact that maybe it's true.
Well, and when you're raised to always be quiet and not reveal that's going on, and now somebody has actually put it out there for anyone to know, that I think was probably very stunning to them, because I'm betting they thought it would never go anywhere past your computer.
Right.
That's exactly right, because when you're raised in an environment of abuse, you take on, or it's presented to you that you could be the victim, because you have always been the victim ever since the day of your birth, especially in a home where your parents try to give you that role.
Yes.
So that the way this all interreacts, as far as your first question about marital betrayal, is that when you go into relationships as an adult, even though you have done tremendous work into your adult years, coming from a child of an abusive home, you still carry that whisper with you, that shadow with you, because you've been raised as a victim in an abusive home. So when you go into adult relationships, you bring that with you, even though you appear to be a well-functioning, integrated adult. If there's a person out there who is looking for certain, I don't want to say disabilities, but certain things that they can hook their hat on in a relationship with you, that person is going to notice in you fairly quickly that you have some disabilities, again, that they can work with. And if somebody even gets a whisper that you may have been a person that would be willing or has in the past had a victim role, they will jump right in. And so you have to be very strong and you have to be very alert. And so with a marital betrayal, my husband, unfortunately, was one of those people who was always a risk taker and always looking for the next big deal and always looking for something he could exploit and always looking for something that was quick and easy. And he indeed did develop a second life and a second family and a hidden bank account. And I became a trusting person. I became someone who had absolutely no idea that that happened until after he passed away. So people say to me, even now, well, you live with the man for so many years. How could you
not have
possibly
known?
know? You're an educated, motivated person who went to college. How could you not know? Well, I'm here to tell you, I did not know.
You know what I find interesting, too? There's two things I want to make a point about. One is we just had someone on the show who we talked about book titles, and her book title is called Whisper in the Blood. And you would think, well, this, how does this relate to your story? But you just validated how it relates to her story.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the cover and the title, you're thinking, well, this doesn't really have anything to do with, a period piece that deals with family rivalry or anything else. But Whisper in the Blood is a great, now that you're talking, it is a good title. The other thing is that we don't know people, and people always, there's always these secretive points to someone's life. I don't think there's anyone out there alive that has something they haven't told. There's always going to be some secret in their life they haven't told, whether it's be to a spouse or a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or whatever. And oftentimes it has to do with shame. We think of it as being something shameful, but in the reality, it's life.
Yeah.
And I think we forget that you can't control the past and sometimes not even the future.
You can't even control sometimes the now.
Present. That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. I mean, we talk about what is verbal abuse, what is physical abuse. There are so many different dimensions to it. And certainly if he's living a secret life, we don't think of that as abuse, but it really is. Because once you find out, now it's mental abuse.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking, you just said, people say to you, how could you not have known? There's the mental torment behind that. So without even realizing it, it was abusive once you found out.
Yeah. Very, very much so.
Yeah.
And people look at you like, well, I don't understand what you're saying. You live with this person every day. You talk to this person. You ate meals together. You shared a clothes closet or whatever it is. You drove cars together. He worked. You worked. You talked about your children. You raised children together. How could you not know? Did you not know this person? And the answer is, I did not know this person.
Right.
And you don't know who the traitor is until his hand is shown.
Right.
And if they are an abuser, which is what my husband was, they're very adept at what they do. And I think to myself, after all of this has occurred, the tremendous amount of energy he must have used to overcome everything so that he could continue to live his lifestyle. If you think about it, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to use 2 households, to maintain 2 families, to hide bank accounts. You have to know what you're doing to do that. You can't just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to have 2 hidden bank accounts or 2 hidden families.
And you have to also realize this man had to be very intelligent to pull that off.
Well, he was intelligent at doing what he wanted.
Right.
Yes, and he was intelligent in general. If he would have only focused the information in a different way, he probably could have done great and wonderful things.
I'm just curious, how did it affect your children when they found out?
It's interesting because it affected them in different ways.
Okay.
And the reason I found this out is because, as I said, I was going through his belongings after we buried my husband. And there was one briefcase in the corner of his office I had not looked through, something he used for his work. And it's the old story about, of course, he worked out of town. And it never occurred to me that he would do anything because I loved him 155%. I figured the same was true for his part. There was no indication.
You would never think
that wasn't
about
true.
It. Right.
Yeah. Correct. There was no indication from his part that was not correct.
Mm-hmm.
So the suspicion never arises. However, in that briefcase, in a small pocket on the side, was a very tiny bank receipt that had an 800 number on it. I'd never seen that bank name before.
Oh.
And I'd never seen that receipt. So I called the bank. Yes, indeed, he had an account there. My name was not on it.
Mm-hmm.
Only his. So they said, we can't give you information. And I said, but I'm his wife. And I wasn't listed as a beneficiary either since he'd passed away. Well, of course, since I'd already researched my family and found out all of their secrets, I said, I know how to research my husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know how to do this, fellas. And, of course, when I found that, it took me about 5 days of going through my own despair, anger, disbelief, all of the death and dying processes that Kubler-Ross tells us about all the time.
Mm-hmm.
As though you were physically losing a person.
Mm-hmm.
I was losing my husband all over again. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but the physical idea of our marriage. And I thought since I had just buried him, I was already grieving. I was grieving again.
Well, it had to be devastating in some regards.
Yes, because all of our married life was now meaningless.
Yeah, it was a lie.
Yeah, it was a lie. Yeah.
All of the ideas that we'd had during our marriage, all of the ceremonies we'd gone through, all the loving things with our children, all the ideas for our future, all of the plans we'd made were all a lie.
So did you ever stop and think about, did you ever mull over in your mind, how did he pull this off?
That's exactly what I thought. How could he possibly do this? I thought I knew this man.
Yeah.
Now, my question to you is this. This is where it could get really interesting. Did you ever meet the other person?
That's a very interesting idea also, because now you're an author. Because I want you to understand there's a whole dynamic here we have not explored. Yes.
Because there's the part of you as the wife that would have been devastated in finding out he had this secret life. But as authors, we're curious.
Yes.
Like, how could this be possible? Because if you're writing about it,
mm-hmm.
I would be curious who that other person is.
Yes.
What they were thinking.
Yes.
And so did you explore that?
Well, let me tell you about my children first, and then we'll go to the next book.
Sounds good.
Yes.
This is definitely a journey.
Yeah,
We're writing today about the journey of writing. Boy, you couldn't have a better plot.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
So my siblings have already disowned me.
Okay.
And now I'm finding out about my husband and his betrayal, and I'm going through my own devastation.
All right.
And after all of that has occurred, and I'll tell you about my children first, then I'll go back to myself. I got the money from the bank account by going through some legal hoops, both in the other state where he had been with his other family and through Nevada, because you have to do a lot of paper wrangling to get all of this done. I had to certify that I was his wife. I had to certify that he was dead. I had to certify that we were married when he died. All of those things, even though even had to certify I was who I was.
Yeah.
Question. The other family, was he married to that other woman?
He wasn't married, no.
Okay. All right.
Thankfully, bigamy was the only thing he had not done.
Yeah, because that could have been a real legal tie-up had that happened.
Yes.
Well, he was lazy. one short.
You know what? That was the one part he was lazy in, not committing bigamy.
Yeah.
So, anyway, after I got the money from the bank, I thought to myself, this was the lie and the betrayal comes in again, because I, at this point, had not told my children that they may have a half-brother and or sister.
Mm-hmm.
So you did keep this from your children for a while?
I did.
Okay.
because it's just pain and devastation.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You probably thought, I don't want to put them through this.
They thought their father was the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Yeah.
He was a great dad. He was just a horrible human being.
Yeah.
But he was a great dad. So I thought. And you know...
Joyce, can I stop you for a minute?
Yes.
In some ways, he might not have been a horrible human being if he was still a great dad to his children.
I'll reserve comment.
Okay. All right, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'm working on that.
Okay, all right.
Because as you know, if you kind of keep information or, let's say, a white lie, it always comes back.
Mhm.
So you might as well be truthful.
Right. It will always surface.
Yes. So I thought about this for a long time, and I thought, should I tell my children the truth, or should I just leave it and let them find out on their own? And I thought, there's going to be a barbecue or family reunion or some kind of people will visit sometime, and they're going to know some kind of information they're going to offhandedly hear, and they would have known that I would have known years before and didn't tell them. And they're going to be mad at me for not letting them know.
Right. Exactly.
So I said, I'm going to tell them.
Okay.
So I brought them all together after I'd got the money, and I said, I do not want any of this. I'm going to divide the bank account money between, I have 3 children, and I'm going to divide them between the 3 of you, which I did. So I had gotten 3 stacks of money, and I called them together, and I said, I'm giving you this money, and I told them where it came from. And the devastation on my children's face was horrifying.
Did they
Yeah.
want the money?
Well, we didn't even get to that part yet. It's like, well, where did the money come from?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This is sounding a lot like my second book.
And and that's what they kept saying. And
Uh-huh.
so I said, let's back up, and I told them the story.
Yeah.
And devastation was all I could see on their face.
Disbelief.
My 2 daughters to this day are devastated, and this has been almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
My son physically had a reaction of someone hitting him with a cannonball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he still has that same reaction and does not believe it's true and thinks I made everything up because his father would never do such a horrible thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And how dare I ever mention anything in a negative way about his dad.
Right. Right.
So that's kind of where that stood, and that's where we stand with that part of it.
So do your children, how are they accepting to you now? Because you had to be in a very odd situation in that these things happened. And I would have felt the same way. I would feel obligated to let the children know. Some people would term this as saying, okay, because people always tell you when there's a divorce. Yours wasn't a divorce. That's what makes it interesting. When there's a divorce, they always tell you don't talk negatively about your spouse because it's not fair to the children.
Right.
And even though you harbor those feelings, you shouldn't share those feelings with your children because you don't want them to look at their father in a negative light.
Right.
So in a way, it's kind of like a divorce, even though he passed on and you, through your own investigation, found out he had this hidden family. To me, I don't know how I would handle it. I'm going to be honest with you. Should I tell him? Should I not tell him? But then here's the money. So what are you going to do with the money? And I get what you're saying, too. I would be just like you. I wouldn't want the money. I would feel like it's dirty money, to be honest. So it's interesting that you chose to divvy it up among the 3 children. But then now how are they going to view this money? Would they view it the same way you did? And so did they?
None of them did.
Okay.
They didn't necessarily focus on the money. They focused on the reaction to the money.
Okay.
And they're still working through that. Their initial reaction, which was different for the girls as it was for the boy, was different, and it is still that way that today. They're still working through that. They don't understand. First of all, my daughters think their father's the sun, the moon, and the stars,
Uh-huh.
and not quite sure what happened. And my son is, oh, my father would never do that. He's the greatest person that ever walked the earth, and it's my dad. They're
Yeah.
still there. I'm not going to do either way. I just give them information and say this is where the money
Well, they're
came
adults,
from. They're
so
adults.
right, yeah.
Right. They're adults. This is where the money came from. I found this note. I told them the situation. I found the bank slip. I called the bank. Your father had a secret bank account. Now, this is not the end of the story by any means.
Okay.
No.
In that briefcase is also a note next to the bank statement. And I thought, well, if he's got this bank account going on, where are the statements going to? Because he's obviously had something deposited and withdrawn, deposited,
Right.
withdrawn.
Right.
Come to find out, as I talk more to the bank, the statements are going to his sister.
Oh.
So she knew.
She knew.
Oh. Oh, she's part of the abuse then.
My sister-in-law, my husband's family,
Knew
knew.
that there was another
Yes.
side to him.
Yes.
Wow.
What would be the reasoning? I'm just curious, though, Joyce. What was their reasoning for not telling you? Because I can't imagine in their mind. Well, I do now. I think I
Well,
already know the
sure.
answer before you even tell me, because that was the way they were brought up, that it was okay to have that mistress.
That's right.
You know, one of the things I noticed, because I know people in the past, I don't know, I think we did talk about it. Well, I know we talked briefly about it today. I had a friend who was brought up in a family to where having a mistress was fine. There was nothing wrong with having a mistress. I don't know if we talked about this in the past when
We briefly touched on it, yes.
Yeah, I had a friend who was from Sweden, and she was brought up as an only child. And in her family, having a mistress, there was nothing wrong with that. And so sometimes I think we get so convoluted with all that we're brought up with, and that what we're taught generationally is fine, that we don't see anything wrong with it. We think this is fine. This is the way you're brought up. This is the norm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, what an interesting way of talking about the journey of writing today.
And there's one more aspect that was
Okay.
in this briefcase. And before we move on, next to the bank statement and the bank note
Okay.
was a letter,
Uh-huh.
a very intimate letter.
To you?
No. It was written on perfumed parchment.
Oh, this really gets good.
And it was written from him to her.
Okay.
Oh.
And it must have been in a situation where he didn't have time to give it to her.
Okay.
And it was very endearing. And it had his name and her name. And it was next to a variety of sexually oriented items.
Mm.
So that's all I can say about that one.
Did they have children?
In the second book, which is fiction,
Mm-hmm.
they have children.
But in reality, did he have children with her?
That was a gray area,
Okay.
and I chose not to go and look into it simply because I couldn't go there.
In other words, you emotionally could not go there.
Correct.
You didn't really want
Yeah.
to know.
I didn't really want to know, but there was lots of indications that that's the case.
Okay. Because in my story that I was telling you about earlier, which was a true story about the person who had 4 boys that passed away and the 2 girls who never had the diseases and grew up and often felt like that they were abandoned because so much time was spent with the boys. In that story, her husband tells his story. This is
Yeah.
true. This is a true story. He was one of 13 children, or no, I'm sorry, 16 children.
Yeah.
And then he also had a father who felt it was fine to have all these mistresses. He had several mistresses, and each mistress, he had like 10, 12, 13 children.
Yeah.
So he had all these brothers and sisters that were out there. Now, again, in this true story, his mother was married to him and the others were not.
Yeah.
He did not commit bigotry. He just lived with these women and had children with them.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting.
Yeah. Good.
Yes.
That was acceptable. That
yes.
it was a generation that accepted that.
Yeah.
And obviously that family, his family, my husband's family,
Uh-huh.
accepted that. Now, their rationale for not letting me know, even after he had passed away, I don't know.
They probably thought you'd never find out.
That's
And that
exactly
would
what
let
I
them
think.
off the hook.
Yes, either that or they got a chuckle out of it, which is very perverse, or
Yes.
Yes.
they, again, thought, well, we're just not going to tell her and we'll sit back here and kind of see how things happen. I don't know. But I can tell you the way it affected me, and you never quite know what's going to affect you, even though you feel like you deal with it, is about 6 months or so after all of this had kind of died down. I was still working, and thank goodness I had been working, because I found out that my husband had canceled our life insurance policy.
Oh, wow.
Also, since he had been in the military and he had retired, you get a life insurance from there. He had canceled that.
Oh.
So after he had passed away, there was nothing for the family.
Okay.
No life insurance and no military annuity.
Now, here's what's interesting, because I do know about this because of what I just dealt with in my own personal life with someone who passed away, whose husband was ex-military. She was able to maintain his life insurance because they had life insurance that you pay for when you're in the service,
Right.
that when you reach retirement age, carries on.
Right. And when my husband retired, he had told me that they give you an option to include your annuity for your spouse.
Right? She had that.
And he said he had done that. He had
He
not.
did not.
Oh my goodness. That's sad in itself,
Yes.
because that's a retirement that you could have been
Yes.
collecting on.
And now what the military does when a person retires after 20 or 22 years or 30 years,
Right.
whatever, they have the spouse come with them to the retirement briefings.
Yes, so that the spouse is on board with what's happening.
Yes.
So they didn't do that in your
Back
case?
in the
No.
day, they did not
did
do
not.
that because
Okay.
my husband had retired a few years before he passed away. So, whatever the military person themselves want is what they did.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
they've changed that system now because so many things like that had happened.
Mhm.
And of
And
course,
the spouse didn't know.
No.
Right.
my husband vowed up and down that he had included that spouse annuity in his retirement, and he had not.
Wow.
And he had canceled our life insurance.
Ah.
Wow.
So if I had not had my own income, my children and I would have been destitute.
Yeah.
Well, and also if you hadn't discovered that secret bank account.
That's right, right. So in addition to that, as all this had gone on, about 6 months or so later, I was getting ready to go to work, and I woke up in the morning, and my hands were swollen up.
Oh.
My feet were swollen up, and I thought, I really must have done something. Got stung by a bee or
Right.
a tick or something. Medically, my mind is racing like
Right, because
that.
you are
Right.
an RN, so
Yes.
you understand. Yeah.
So I thought, well, I have to think about what's going on. You're in that twilight of waking up and you're not quite sure what's going on, but your
Yeah.
body doesn't feel right.
Mhm.
Yep.
So I thought for a minute, what's going on here? And so I looked at my hands and my feet, and sure enough, they were swollen. They looked like little sausages.
Wow.
I'm thinking, what's going on here? And I had gone to the gym a lot, and I thought, well, maybe when I was really hitting the punching bag or something, I hit and broke my bones in my
The
hand.
vessels, yeah.
But I thought, well, I've got to go to work. So I've got to get up. And every bone in my body hurt. My muscles ached. My feet were swollen. What is going on here? So I shuffled around, found something to wear. I looked horrible. My face was swollen. And I thought, what could possibly be going on? Your mind races.
Right.
So as soon as I got off work, I went to the doctor. She did a bunch of tests. She raced them through for results, and they diagnosed me with systemic lupus and a whole myriad of autoimmune diseases.
Yeah.
Brought on by
Systemic
stress.
lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Charcot-Marie tooth disease, fibromyalgia, Raynaud's, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
Due to the stress.
Yeah.
So that's the hopefully the whole range of problems that my husband and or his lifestyle has visited on our family.
Yeah.
So that's the first book.
That's a lot. And the second book?
The second book talks about generations intertwined. It is fiction, but it's based on the first. And it talks about the family members that are involved in the first book. And it talks about the other family. Mm-hmm. The first family, my family, in reality, meets the second family.
Okay.
And the name of the first is kind of disguised a bit. I use our middle names.
Uh-huh.
And her family, the other woman, is called Pamela. Uh-huh. And she has a daughter. And she's very successful. She lives in another state. She has a daughter. She's very independent. She's been independent and very successful for many years. But she has a little bit of a tendency to be somebody that maybe William, who is my husband's name in the second book, which is his real name, tends to hone in on, presents himself as a single person, just, here for a job and looking for a place to receive his mail and would like to rent a room because she owns and runs her own hotel. And wouldn't it be great if they could go to lunch? So the second book kind of sets tone there. And as we progress in the book, they do have a romantic relationship since he's a single guy and she's a single girl. And they like each other. They end up living together. They have a child. However, he comes back to his original state, which is Nevada, and he's got some blood tests to go through, and come to find out he has a terminal disease.
Oh.
He cannot get back to Colorado, which is where the second book takes place, and the terminal disease is so advanced by the time he takes care of it that he can't get back to his second family, and he dies with his original family, his first family, and his children. However, the only reason his second family knows about all of this is because his boss, who knows all of this, first, second family, first family, past history, work history, personal history, comes to visit William when he's in the hospital. And they share secrets on the deathbed.
Oh, wow.
So that's the second book. And everybody meets everybody in the second book. The married woman meets the second other woman. All the kids meet each other. They figure out how they're related. Nobody likes it. Nobody understands it. Nobody knows why it happened. It happened, obviously. Everybody hates everything.
So it sounds like the second book is kind of like what you wish would have happened.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's the fictional side of the first story.
Yes, exactly right. And the reason I did it fiction is because there's been so much hurt and pain. There's been so much intensity. There's been so much angst, if you will, in the first book that the second book needs to be a little softer, even though it's still intense. These people need to meet each other because this is where, as they say, the action takes place. Even though the first book, there's been lots and lots of action, it's all been secret. This needs to be the beginning of the process of healing, which is what I think it needs to all be about. This is where we actually get to the meat of the story, because the reason I write the first book, even though it's all intense, is to make it easier, to make it less intense, to equalize the pain and make it softer, because other people will encounter this. So the action happens in the second book. In the third book, and towards the end of the second book, what happens here is there's two teenage girls in high school. They meet in science class. They both love science. They're best friends. They're best buddies forever.
Oh, my.
They look nothing alike. They don't even live in the same area. One's from Colorado, one's from Nevada. One is tall, one is a little shorter, one's got curly black hair. The other's got sharp red hair. But they're best buddies. Their DNA test is going to go to the regional competition. So to make sure everything's correct, and they're going to work with the state lab, they do their own DNA testing to make sure the sampling and everything is as it should be. They work with their science teacher. Everything's in good order. The results come back, and they find they're related.
Yeah.
So this is the third book.
This is the second book. At the end of the second book, since everybody's meeting everybody. How could that possibly be? These two teenage girls have never met each other, don't know each other, and have never lived in the same state. Yeah. So the third book is, how are we related and what's going to go on here? Not only are the girls related, but all the adults around them are related. How could that be?
Oh, my goodness.
Look what William has done.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not only that, but the third generation of this family, which is the grandchildren on both sides, do the healing. Because they don't carry the scars. Right. They don't carry the memories. They just want to live life and be young and be happy and be teenagers. They don't even know why these old people carry all this crap around with them, because they don't see the importance of it. All they know is grandma's not happy, mom's not happy, auntie's not happy. What are they all talking about? Why do they have secrets on the phone? Everybody's meeting with each other, talking about each other, having secret conversations.
Yep.
They're teenage girls. They're best buddies. They just want to have stuff. They like science. No big deal.
Yep.
Until, and that's going to be in the third book, the DNA Science Fair regional competition comes up, and they have to discuss this and disclose this to the world.
Wow.
Cliffhanger.
Wow.
Yep. Well, Joyce, I hate to tell you this, but we're running out of time.
There you go.
So where can we learn more about your books?
I have two sites. One is linesoflistening.com, which is a place where you can buy my books. The second one is where I maintain my health and wellness blog. It's linesoflisteningblog.wordpress.com.
Okay. And we can get your books also on Amazon.com?
Yes, you can. Amazon.com.
All right, Joyce. Joyce Kaye Gatschenberger has been on the show, and we'd like to thank you for being on our show. And then...
this is so interesting. Oh, my God.
I knew you was going to like this one, Janet.
Oh, yeah.
And Janet Coursey, thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
So to find more about our guests, just go to aspectsofwriting.com, and you'll find links there. Just click on their picture or their book cover, and you'll find out more about them. You can listen to this show on Aspects of Writing, or you can go to the Aspects of Writing to get all the links to our shows. And our show is distributed through amfm247.com. And we're also on youtube.com. We're on Roku TV, iHeartRadio, iTunes Radio. So again, to learn more about our show and the 14 terrestrial stations where our show plays, just go to aspectsofwriting.com. We're also on Blog Talk Radio at 9 o'clock on Sundays. Mm-hmm. And we archive all of our shows on aspectsofwriting.com. Just go to the archive link. So until next week, this is your host, James Kelly, remind you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you so much, Joyce, for being on the show.
Fabulous show.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Janet.
It was a great pleasure.
Thank you so much.